In my late 80s now, with hands that shake even when the room is silent, there is one mission I have never spoken about. Not to my wife, not to my sons, not even to the Navy psychiatrist who tried for years to make me open up. This mission was sealed in a folder marked never to be released, and then even the folder was burned. Yet the ocean never forgets. Every time fog drifts in from the shoreline, I hear it again. The slow, steady thump of a Soviet engine we followed for days without ever being seen. I can still feel the vibration running through my bones, the suffocating pressure of matching their speed, getting close enough to almost touch the steel hull, knowing a single wrong sound could ignite a global war. What happened on the seventh night was never reported, never admitted, and truth be told, it should never have happened at all. It was a choice that may have saved millions, yet condemned one innocent life forever. And sometimes, when the fog is thickest, I whisper to myself, if the Cold War had a heartbeat, it was that ship. I was 23 during the Cold War, young, sharp-eared, and foolish enough to believe the ocean had rules. The Navy trained me as both a sonar operator and an auxiliary diver on a U.S. destroyer built for silence rather than speed. Back then, the world sat on a knife's edge. One wrong move, a single misunderstood noise, could ignite a war that would end everything. Every shadow on the radar was a potential threat. Every unidentified thump could be a torpedo or a submarine rising from the deep. Our missions were simple to describe, but terrifying to execute, silent trailing. We were to follow Soviet vessels for days, sometimes weeks, without surfacing, without signaling, without letting so much as a loose wrench hit the deck. If they detected us, even for a moment, diplomacy could collapse. Most people think war is loud, guns, bombs, chaos, but during the Cold War, war was silence. Silence so heavy it pressed against your skull. Silence so tense even your heartbeat felt dangerous. We lived in that silence. Night after night, listening to the ocean breathe, waiting for the sound that might end the world. One night, around 2300 hours, the captain summoned a select handful of us into the chart room. The lights were dim, the door locked, and the air smelled of stress. A single photograph lay on the table, a Soviet research vessel named Volchitsa, though none of us believed that label for a second. Intelligence suspected the Volchitsa carried a prototype radar jamming device, something that could blind our coastal defenses if deployed near U.S. waters. Our orders were clear: follow the vessel. Stay unseen, stay unheard, stay alive. The captain's eyes were darker than I'd ever seen. This mission, he said quietly, does not exist. If anything goes wrong, Washington will deny all knowledge. A knot twisted in my stomach. We all understood the meaning. If we were caught, we were on our own. If we failed, history might never mention our names. And yet we nodded. That was our job. We found the Volchitsa at 2:17 hours. Or rather, we heard it. A faint, rhythmic thump rolled across the water, the slow heartbeat of a Soviet diesel engine. When its silhouette finally emerged against the moonlit sky, it looked like a dark animal gliding across the surface. We matched its speed. Every officer, every deckhand moved as though walking on glass. Boots softened, voices only in whispers, tools strapped down. Every metal latch secured with cloth. You do not truly understand fear until the ship you're on behaves like a hunted creature, breathing quietly, moving with exaggerated care, terrified of making a sound that gives away its presence. Even breathing felt like a potential crime. I kept my headphones tight over my ears, listening to the Soviet engine, tracking its rhythm, memorizing its pulse. We were so close I could almost feel its vibrations through the hull. Days passed in near silence. You could feel tension dripping off the crew like sweat. No one slept properly. Every bunk felt shallow, fragile, as though one loud snore could start a war. Meals were eaten silently, forks never scraped. Coffee cups clinked against nothing. Men held them in both hands just to steady themselves. Some began to hallucinate. One sailor swore he heard whispers coming through the pipes. Another thought he saw a periscope tailing us. The engine thump of the Volchitsa became a lullaby we couldn't escape, a constant reminder that we were inches from death. The closest call came on the third night. The Soviet ship slowed without warning. We had to stop our own engines instantly and drift. No propulsion, no corrections. Just prayer, a strong wave pushed us dangerously close. I heard our hull groan. For 30 seconds, very long, very fragile seconds, we were a single gust of wind away from scraping against them. But the ocean spared us. For a while, Night 7 arrived shrouded in thick fog so dense it felt like the ocean had grown walls. Visibility dropped to maybe 6 feet. Radar became unreliable. Sonar distorted. Navigation turned into guesswork. Still, we kept trailing. Still, we followed the Volchitsa's heartbeat. Then at 3:46 hours, I heard it, a sound that had no place in the mission, a metallic scrape. Low, long, too close, I froze. The scrape came again, louder, vibrating through my bones. The Soviet ship stopped abruptly. Alarm lights flickered across its silhouette. Men ran across its deck, shouting in Russian. Something had alerted them, something small but unmistakable. Our captain whispered, "No one moves, no one breathes, we are not here." Next few seconds felt like centuries. If the Soviets spotted even a shadow on the water, they would assume enemy contact. One signal flare, one misinterpreted movement, and half the world might start firing missiles. The scrape sounded again. We were exposed. But how? The answer came from engineering, a loose hull panel on our underside. The rough waves had torn it partially free. Every time we drifted close, it rubbed against their wake, creating the metallic noise. The captain exhaled sharply. "We can't risk another scrape. We send a diver." That diver was me. I slid into the freezing, ink-black water. It swallowed me instantly. My breath turned to steam inside the mask. Below, our hull loomed like a dark cliff. Above, I could hear muffled Russian voices. Soviet sailors scanning the fog eye found the loose panel trembling under the current. Each vibration sent a ripple of noise. If they heard it again, they would know. They would shoot flares. They would fire weapons. They would radio command. Hands shaking, I tried to secure it. It slipped. Edel scraped again, louder than before. A Soviet sailor leaned over the railing. I froze beneath him, inches from visibility. I pressed myself into the shadow of their massive propeller to stay hidden. I should have chosen a different angle. I should have backed away. But fear makes fools of us all. Just then, their engine rumbled, only for a second, just enough to test bearings. The propeller shifted barely a foot. But that tiny movement sent a suction current swirling toward me, and toward the sailor leaning over. He lost his balance, arms flailing, hands grasping nothing. I watched it in slow motion, his body slipping, his foot catching the edge, his torso tilting forward. I reached out instinctively, but I was too far, too slow, too terrified to move. The current pulled him in. The propeller took him. A single thump, then silence. His scream never reached the air. No one saw me, but they saw him vanish. And they believed it was a tragic accident. I knew better. I had caused it. The Volchitsa erupted in panic. Shouts, lights, alarms, flares fired into the fog. Search crews ran to the rails, calling the sailor's name. I stayed underwater, heart hammering like it wanted to tear through my ribs. I swam backward, deeper into the dark, trembling so badly I could barely steady my hands. When I reached my ship's retrieval line, I clung to it like a lifeline. I surfaced only when the captain's whisper crackled in my earpiece. "Come home." Now, back aboard, I collapsed onto the deck, still hearing that sickening thump. The captain crouched beside me. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. "You were never in the water," he said. "You saw nothing. This mission continues." The official Soviet report later called it an accidental fall, but I knew the truth, and it hollowed me out. We retreated that same night. Silent engines, no lights, no record of contact. Washington later stamped the mission successful. The Volchitsa turned back towards Soviet waters, its crew grieving one loss but unaware of the shadow that had followed them. Everyone else celebrated. They said our stealth had prevented a global crisis. They said the mission had proven our ship superior, but I felt none of it. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw the face of that young sailor, his moment of realization, his final helpless movement, the way the ocean swallowed him. The world was safe. He was not, and I was the reason. When we finally docked, sailors cheered, kissed the ground, wrote letters home. Newspapers praised our unseen guardians. There were medals, promotions, speeches. I stayed silent. I avoided the celebrations. I stared at the water, hearing that Soviet engine thump beneath the waves, slow, ghostly, eternal. Before we disembarked, command delivered one final order. You will never speak of this. And I didn't, not for 60 years. Not until now, when the fog outside my window carries that heartbeat back to me, reminding me of the life I took and the war I nearly started. The narrator, once a sharp-eared Navy sonar operator and diver, now speaks with the weight of decades pressing on his voice. His breaths are slow, deliberate, as if each memory costs him something. Age has softened his body, but not the guilt he carries. Guilt born from a single, unintended death that still wakes him in the middle of the night. Captain Harris, his commanding officer during Operation Storm Lantern, was the kind of man who carried authority like a second skin. Calm and unshakable even in the tensest moments, Harris believed that silence saved nations. He made decisions without hesitation, decisions that shaped the fate of ships and men alike. Lieutenant Ward, the narrator's best friend, served as the team's backbone of morale. He hid his fear behind sarcasm and humor, always nudging the narrator back to focus when the pressure felt unbearable. Ward's companionship was the one thing that kept the narrator steady. And then there was Viktor, a young Soviet deckhand who had no idea he was living inside a silent battlefield. He wasn't a soldier, just a worker with a tired back and simple dreams. His life ended in a moment of tragic miscalculation, and that moment became the narrator's eternal burden. The narrator's story is built on a foundation of guilt, so heavy it bends his voice even after 60 long years. The weight comes from knowing that Viktor's death, sudden, brutal, and never intended, was a direct consequence of his own desperate attempt to stay hidden. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees the young man's silhouette vanish into the churning metal, and the sound of that moment, the wet, metallic snap, replays like a nightmare lodged between his ribs. What makes the guilt worse is the memory of the silence that surrounded everything. It wasn't an ordinary quiet. It was a suffocating, terrifying stillness where every breath, every shift of the hull, every creak carried the possibility of sparking a world war. Yet within that tension, the crew held onto an unspoken brotherhood. Men leaned on each other with subtle nods, whispered encouragements, shared glances that admitted fear without ever naming it. The narrator remembers how Lieutenant Ward's jokes, spoken barely above a whisper, kept him sane. But underwater, that fragile comfort vanished. He still recalls hearing the muffled Soviet voices above him while he floated in the freezing black, so close he could almost touch them, yet divided by a deadly silence neither side understood. Then came the horrific sound that tore his world apart, the muffled scream, the violent churn, the sudden stop. The narrator fled underwater, kicking through pain and panic, lungs burning, heart pounding with the knowledge that he had been inches from being seen. When he returned to the ship, shaking uncontrollably, Captain Harris met him with eyes of iron and words that would scar him forever. This never happened. That order became his prison. Decades passed, but the secret stayed alive inside him like a rusted anchor. Foggy mornings trigger tremors in his hands. The low hum of engines makes his throat tighten. A distant foghorn can pull him back into that seventh night instantly. And now, as an old man with little time left, he breaks his silence for the first time. His voice cracks, not from age, but from a lifetime of carrying a truth too heavy for one man to carry alone. The core conflict of the mission was simple yet terrifying. They had to remain invisible no matter the risk, no matter the psychological cost. The Soviet ship kept shifting speed, drifting left or right without warning, forcing the U.S. destroyer to adjust in perfect silence. Every correction, every vibration, every creak of metal felt like a gamble with global consequences. For the narrator, the underwater inspection became a personal battleground, crushing water pressure squeezing his ribs, darkness swallowing the world around him, and the knowledge that one misplaced sound could start a war. His hands shook as he secured the loose panel scraping beneath the hull, knowing that even the tap of his tool could be catastrophic. Then came the twist that shattered him. As he floated beneath the Soviet vessel, he heard a young sailor, Viktor, softly murmuring a song in Russian. Not a military chant, not a coded command, just a simple tune, the kind a young man sings to fight boredom or loneliness. It humanized him instantly, turning the enemy into someone painfully real. Minutes later, Viktor died, pulled into the propeller because the narrator panicked and moved too fast, trying desperately to stay hidden. The cover-up was swift and absolute. The U.S. government sealed the mission inside classified vaults. Official logs coldly stated, "No diver deployed." No contact made, Soviet casualty, accidental fall. The narrator was forced into silence, warned that speaking would threaten national security. For over 60 years, that lie lived inside him like a slow poison. Now, with his voice trembling and his years running out, he finally lets the truth leave his chest. It is not courage, just the breaking point of a lifetime spent carrying a tragedy no one else knew existed. The narrator's voice softens, trembling with age and memory, as he reaches the final breaths of his confession. He admits he never returned to the sea after that mission, not even once. The ocean, once his workplace, became a graveyard he could never face again. He explains that people often say one life saved can prevent thousands from dying, and perhaps that is true, perhaps Viktor's death prevented a global catastrophe. But for him, it has never felt like a noble exchange. It has only ever felt like guilt wearing his name. He reveals that Viktor still appears in his dreams, standing quietly on the deck of that Soviet ship, humming the same faint song he heard underwater, soft, human, undeserving of the fate he met. The narrator hopes that by finally speaking the truth, Viktor is freed from the cold label of accident and remembered instead as a young man who never chose to be part of a silent war. His final line arrives like a cracked whisper, barely holding itself together. The Cold War never exploded, but inside me it never ended.